With autism, one tends to be hyper aware. Autism is kind of like living life without any kind of filter. It's a very raw, vulnerable, and exposing existence for me. And due to that, due to there being no filters, I take in a lot of stimuli. I'm aware of pretty much all the stimuli that's always around me. And that can be very exhausting and taxing on my system, which leads to system overload, sensory overload. And when this happens, it's basically like taking a computer, one of the old fashioned desktop computers that very few people use these days, and unplugging it, right? It just shuts down. And that's what happens to me. And that usually comes in the form of a meltdown. Um, and a meltdown for me is very painful. When I have a meltdown, it feels like my brain is on fire, while simultaneously being in a vice grip that's getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's excruciating. It's all internal pain, emotional, mental pain. And during these times, I can regress to back to, when I was really, for lack of a better term, very low functioning when I was a child and teenager. And I will not be able to process any words or commands. I won't be able to talk. I can maybe respond with a yes or no or a head nod or a head shake. But these meltdowns are, again, my system is overloaded by all the stimuli, sight, sense of touch, hearing, smell, taste, everything is always going through my processing mechanisms with no filter. And that's what typically leads to sensory overload and subsequently a meltdown. Another aspect of living with autism that's very difficult is when I have meltdowns in public. Autism for me is a very invisible disability. You will very seldom see me behave autistically, right? But when I do, people still don't see it as autism. I've had a lot of meltdowns in public where, I'm a grown man, and whether it's an airport or the DMV, when I have a meltdown, I start sobbing. I can pound my chest. I get this huge adrenaline rush because with autism, studies have shown that the amygdala can be inflamed, and the amygdala controls our fight or flight response, and controls our fear. So it's almost like I'm always in survival mode. I have this animal instinct to have to react to all this raw data coming into me, and then when I get overloaded, I'm like, I either gotta fight or flight, right? And sometimes I fight by fighting myself. I will pound my chest. I will yell at the top of my lungs. I will even headbang. Not because I want to hurt myself, but because I would rather feel the pain of hitting and sometimes punching myself in the head rather than the pain on the inside. The internal pain is much more excruciating than any kind of physical pain. There's some meltdowns where I wish I, could exchange it for getting shot. I mean, that's how tormenting it can be to have these meltdowns for me. And, when society thinks of autism and a meltdown, they typically picture a kid, kind of curling into a ball, crying. Um, but they don't picture adults like that, especially adults like me, who, again, I'm unfortunately, when I have meltdowns in public, I can apparently come across as intimidating, menacing, um, threatening. And so that scares me because I've had a lot of close calls with police officers who, again, don't see my autism because it's invisible. And so that's why I'm very passionate about reforming the criminal justice system in regards to invisible disabilities. Another aspect that's very difficult for me to live with in regards to autism is, for me, I think differently. It's, again, going back to a computer analogy, I have a different operating system. It's almost like the world runs on Mac and I run on Windows. So with that comes a lot of, unfortunately, I get misunderstood a lot. In my personal relationships, especially romantic relationships, um, there's a knowledge gap, there's an understanding gap. And it takes a lot of communication and finding a language that me and my partner and me and my platonic friends, we have to find a common language that we can communicate through, because oftentimes how I think does not fit into the regular norms of how typical people think. And so that is very exhausting, almost always being misunderstood, not, by nefarious means, but just because it's a different operating system, right? So that's tiresome too because I always have to explain myself and clarify things, and that's kind of degrading too when I always have to explain myself. I'm tired of explaining myself. I just kind of want to live, and so I surround myself with people who, after a while getting to know me, I don't have to explain myself anymore because they learn my language and I learn their language, and that's a beautiful thing. And then the last thing I'll say in this short series is with autism, one tends to be either hyposensitive or hypersensitive to pain. So for me, for instance, an example is physical pain. I'm very hyposensitive to it. Again, I can hit myself in the head and be fine with it. I was playing a basketball pickup game yesterday, and like some 6'10" guy elbowed me right in the fucking head, right? And I just kept playing. He stopped. He's like, "Holy shit, man, are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, let's keep playing." So I have a very high pain tolerance. So don't ever get in a fight with me. um, but emotionally, mentally, I'm very hypersensitive to emotional pain, mental pain, internal pain. And so I'm very fragile. I'm very sensitive on the inside and very tough when it comes to my physical body. And that is kind of a dichotomy because, again, there are some times where I get hurt just by somebody maybe, not giving me a smile when I needed a smile that day. And that will just like crush my heart because I have such a big heart and I feel so much because of that lack of filter. And I care so much that the littlest things can really be triggers for me and really cut deep. And sometimes it's a death by a million cuts. So those are just a very few things that autism is like for me. Again, this is about my autism. I don't want to speak for anybody else because, autism is such a wide spectrum. While we share similarities, they manifest very differently. So I hope this is just good food for thought, some contextualization for you to implement into the loved ones who have autism. And obviously, of course, there's a higher rate of mental illness when you are diagnosed with autism. And so I just hope that my journey and this video and my account, my profile, my work, my presentations can help bring some insight into your experience or to those you love that are around you. Thank you.